Today's video is going to be a follow-up tutorial of a look that was inspired by Billie Eilish. You can check out the first part of that tutorial where I cover the draping and the pattern making process. Now this is not going to be an exact replica of the look, but I wanted to draw inspiration from the details on the cups and just make it my own. Hence why I'm using completely different types of fabrics compared to the original design. Now most times when I make these tutorials, my main goal is just to teach the pattern making process and the finishing. But I want to hear what you guys think. Do you prefer the look to be exact to the inspiration, or you prefer learning the design process? So please share your thoughts in the comments. For my main fabrics, I'll be using Mikado and Ashoke. The Ashoke is a traditional hand-woven fabric that is mostly used by the Yoruba tribe in Nigeria. I'll be using the Ashoke for the cup part of the design, and for the bodice, I'll be using 2 shades of Mikado. I chose 2 shades because in the original design, you can see the contrast between the bone casing and the main bodice. For the lining, I have this cotton poplin, and for interfacing, I have this fusible canvas. I'm also using a plastic boning for the corset and D-rings that will serve as my loop for the lacing on the back. Following the grain line on my main fabric, I'm going to lay out my pattern pieces and cut it out. Here are my pattern pieces all cut out. I cut 2 pieces for the center back, 2 pieces for the side back, and 2 pieces for the side front. And for the center front, I cut that part on fold. Now I'm going to repeat the same process to cut the interfacing, the lining, and also I did end up using a lightweight interfacing for the lining as well. So here I've gone ahead to attach and press on the interfacing on the main fabric and the lining. Now I'm going to pin the pattern pieces to get it ready for stitching. Starting with the back, I'm going to go ahead and pin the center back to the side back. Repeat the same on the other side and to the lining as well. Moving on to the front, I'm going to pin both side fronts to the center front and also on the lining. After pinning all my fabric pieces in place, I'm going to go ahead and cut about 4.5 centimeter width of bias strips. Now this is what I'm going to use as the bone casing. For the cup part of the corset, I'm just making sure all my notches are in place. I also have the draped piece pinned under the original pattern, just so I can clearly see all the details when I'm cutting out. Again, this part is going to be cut on the Ashoke fabric. So here I've gone ahead to interface the fabric before cutting. This is just to make sure the fabric does not shrink in the process of pressing on the interfacing. I also added another 1/4 inch allowance just to accommodate any fraying. And I cut 2 pieces of the cup part. Now I'm going to cut the lining, but just enough to cover the cup area, leaving out the straps. After cutting, I made sure to transfer all my notches onto the fabric. I'm going to start by first finishing the neckline of the cup. So I'm going to place my lining along the neckline area of the cup, pin in place and stitch down using 1/2 inch. This is what the neckline looks like after stitching and pressing. Now I'm going to place it on my dress form just to properly arrange the pleated area on the cups. I also ran a basting stitch around the cup so that it doesn't end up looking flat. So here I'm okay with how the pleat looks, and I see that there's no gaping on the neckline. I'm going to go ahead and finish the shoulder strap. To do this, I'm going to grab the notched points on the strap and fold it towards the back, like so. Also make sure there's still about 1/2 inch left along the side of the cup while you're pinning. The 1/2 inch left along the side is going to be finished with a bias. Now I'm carefully going to fold along the straps like so, pin in place and stitch. The stitch is going to start slightly curved from the top of the neckline and go straight along the rest of the strap. Make sure to notch the curved part along the seam when you're done stitching. After stitching, I'm going to turn the straps inside out. And this is what it looks like when done. Now I'm carefully going to fold along the seam line and press. So at this point, I've pressed the straps and I'm going to finish around the cups with a bias. So my bias width is about 3.5 inch and I'm going to press it on fold. To attach the bias around the side of the cup, I'm going to fold the top of the bias with about 1/2 inch and carefully pin in place around the cup. Towards the end of the bias, I'm going to trim off the excess, leaving about 1/2 inch. And I'm going to repeat the exact same process to the second cup. Now I'm going to stitch around the cup using 1/2 inch. To finish this part, I'm going to fold down the 1/2 inch that I left, fold the bias towards the wrong side, and carefully pin in place. After pinning, I'm going to finish the bias by stitching right in between the seams, like so. So this is what it looks like all done. Now I'm going to repeat the exact same process of attaching the bias to the second cup. And this is what it looks like all done. Moving on to the bodice part of the corset, I'm going to stitch all the seam allowance with 1/2 inch. Next, I'm going to top stitch both sides of the seam from the front. I'm going to repeat the same process to the lining and the rest of the bodice. Now once I'm done stitching both the front and the back of the bodice, I'm going to place them side by side and finish the side seam using 1/2 inch. And also top stitch both sides of the seams as well. So here all my seams are done. I've gone ahead to notch the seams and press them out as well. And I also repeated the same to the lining. Next, I'm going to even out the hem of the lining and the main bodice. On the center front of the lining, I'm going to attach a polyester boning, and that's because the rest of the seams is going to have a bone casing except the center front. I made sure to leave about 1/2 inch on the top and the bottom for the seam allowance. And this is what it looks like stitched. Next, I'm going to stitch the bias down for the bone casing. But first, I made sure to size it up by checking the width of my boning to know the exact width to stitch. After stitching, I'm going to turn the bias inside out using a loop turner. After pressing out the bias, I'm going to match each of them along the seam and cut by making it about 1 or 1.5 inch longer than the actual length of the seam. I'm going to repeat the same process till I've cut all the bias for each of the seam line. Now I'm going to attach it along the seam by stitching on both sides of the edge. I'm going to repeat the exact same process to the rest of the seam until all the bone casing is attached. Once I'm done stitching, I'm going to finish by pressing out all the seams. To finish the neckline, I'm going to lay the lining over the main bodice with right sides facing and carefully pin in place. Next, I'm going to finish this part by stitching down with 1/2 inch. Once I'm done stitching, I'm going to finish with an understitch on the lining. And then press along the neckline when done. To finish the cup area, I'm going to fold the fabric out to the wrong side like so and carefully pin in place. After pinning in place, I'm going to stitch down using 1/4 of an inch. And here's what it looks like after stitching. Next, I'm going to notch the corners of the seam just to reduce the bulk around that area when it's turned inside out. Now I'm going to turn it inside out, making sure all the corners are well defined. Next, I'm going to finish by pressing out the seams. And here's what that looks like. Now the next thing to do is to prepare the boning. And I did this by measuring along each of the seams and cutting the boning to match that length and minusing about 1/2 inch for the hem allowance. So for context, if my seam length is 10 inches, my boning length is going to be 9.5 inches. Now to prepare the loops on the center back, I'm going to be using the D-rings and bias. To do this, I'm going to cut about 2-inch length of the finished bias, insert it into the D-rings like so, and stitch really close to the rings to secure in place. Now this is going to be attached the same way a regular loop will be done. The only difference is it just has a ring attached to it. Next, I'm going to mark out the spacing between each loop, stitch the loops in place, and then finish by facing with the lining. Now after facing the center back, I decided to add a bone casing just because I wanted it to match the rest of the casing on the bodice. To attach the cups to the main bodice, I'm going to carefully place the cups around the curve on the main bodice and carefully pin in place. And I'm going to pin this with about 1/4 inch away from the outer curve. This is what it looks like at the back. Now I'm going to carefully stitch in place right in between the seams of the bias. To secure the side of the strap, I'm going to gently tuck it behind the seam like so, backstitch a couple of times, and then finish the seams by sewing right in between the bias all the way around the cup. So this is what it looks like done. Next, I'm going to just gently press around the bias area on the cup and then repeat the exact same process for the second cup. So this is what it looks like after both of the cups is attached, and this is what it looks like from the inside. I love that the cup has a lot of depth to it because I'm a double D girly, so this will fit me just right. The major part of this corset is done, so we just have a few things left to do. Is to mark the final length of the strap, insert the bonings, and finish the hemline. So for the final strap length, it did take me a couple of fittings to get the perfect length. Now once I was sure of the length, I marked it and I reinserted it into the seam along the neckline on the back. I did that before inserting the boning and finishing the hemline so that it was easy to maneuver. Next, I went ahead to insert the bonings. Now before I did this, I finished the ends of the boning by just melting it down slightly. And then finally, I'm going to finish the hem by using a bias. The bias width was about 2.5 inches. I stitched it the exact way I finished around the cups. And you guys, here is the final reveal. I know all the details is not exact to the inspiration, but my main goal was to show the detailed part of the cups, and I think that's what I did in this tutorial. But you guys, you can share your thoughts below. Let me know what you think, and thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Bye!